Joined now by the chairman of the Reform Jersey Party, Deputy Sam Mézec, is in to keep the hot seat warm, possibly hot in this hour, I think. Welcome, Deputy. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Right, let's go back to the beginning of Reform, first of all. In my head, I think it's been around ages, but actually it's, 3 years or so?
I think we founded initially in 2012, but not as a political party. We were originally a pressure group, and we were set up when it looked like we were going to have a referendum on electoral reform. And we sort of came together as a group of people who shared the same vision that we support democracy, basically, and we believed in a system that would allow every single person in the island to have an equal vote and an equal say on the government of this island. So we sort of set up to campaign for that. As most islanders will know, it didn't go very well. We had a referendum. It was a bit of a farce. The questions weren't very good, and the states ended up ignoring it anyway. After that, I was very eager to get involved in politics at some point because of that. I wasn't sure when in my life I wanted it to be. You know, I might have waited until I was in my 40s. I may have, done it sooner. But I sort of had a few things that happened in my life that made me feel actually I wanted to make a difference sooner rather than later. And when I stood in the by-election to the States of Jersey last March, I sort of I thought I could win, but I didn't know I would win. And when I did win, I was obviously delighted by that. And I remember 2 days after sitting in a room in the States building with Deputy Jeff Southern and Deputy Montfort Tadje, who I know shared my common values on democracy. And we said, right, let's make this official. Let's make it a political party and see what we can do to affect change.
OK, so we don't have a system, do we, of political parties over here. If you were a UK party, just so we can get it in our heads, if you were in the UK forming this party, say those issues you've just explained existed in the UK, which party would you be nearest to?
I think we'd be nearest to the UK Labour Party, but there are elements of our party which are similar to the Liberal Democrats and similar to the Green Party as well. So we're not exactly like the Labour Party. We don't have an affiliation with trade unions like the Labour Party does, but we're very much supportive of that left-of-centre social democratic way of thinking.
OK, so you've got Reform Jersey. Give us a sense of how big the party is, how many followers you have in the group.
We've got 140 signed up members, and that's going up quite steadily, I think. Every now and then when there's a big event like the protests we had at the Esplanade a few weeks ago, we tend to get a spike in membership, and anyone who wants to join can join for free. There's an online form at reformjersey.je. And in terms of our support network, well, our Facebook page has got well over 1,000 people who've liked it, which makes it one of the biggest political pages in the Channel Islands. And I think we're provoking a lot of debate in the island, and we certainly punch above our weight in terms of the voice that we give out.
OK, so you want all of these changes. You want to change the world almost, it seems, from what you're saying to me. What have you changed so far, then?
I think the thing I'm most proud of, and I feel this a lot when I go knocking on doors and when I speak in particular to young people, it was Reform Jersey who put the issue of equal marriage on the agenda in the States. Nobody was doing it. I got elected and said, well, actually, I believe in this, and I believe that the majority of islanders believe in this. So I was the one who brought forward the proposition, and we've got another vote coming up in the States on some of the practicalities to do with that, but it looks very likely that by 2017 same-sex couples will be able to get married in Jersey, and I'm thoroughly proud of that.
Tony Gillam
on BBC Radio Jersey.
Okie doke, in the hot seat today, Deputy Sam Mézec, who's chairman of the Reform Jersey Party. He's here till 1 o'clock. You want to reform the whole system, then, of government here, Deputy, from your humble beginnings 3 years ago. Do you see the day when we will have a system of political parties here in Jersey?
I've got to be honest, I think we already do. I just think that some politicians aren't honest about it. At the moment, the law in the States of Jersey is if you are a minister, you have to vote with the Chief Minister on issues of Council of Ministers policy. That means that if you get elected on the basis of an independent manifesto, but later on in government the Chief Minister decides he wants to overrule you, you have to throw your manifesto out of the window and do as he says. Now, I think that's completely undemocratic if you're not doing so on a mandate of a political party. So they do act like political parties at the moment. I think the only difference is that Reform Jersey is very open and honest about that. This is who we are, this is what we stand for, and it's on the ballot paper.
OK, then. So we have this system that involves those policies through the Council of Ministers. We also have the system of scrutiny panels. Aren't they an effective opposition?
They're not, and I think it's very important that they're not, because what the scrutiny panels cannot and must not be used for is political point scoring, and I don't think they should also be used to try and gain an electoral advantage outside of the states. What scrutiny panels exist for is to look at what the government is doing and examine things based on the evidence and come up with an objective view on the benefits or negatives of what the government is doing. And it can't propose unique scrutiny. Only political parties or independent politicians can do that. But scrutiny is very important, and unfortunately it gets neglected by the government a lot because I think they're quite complacent about it and think they can just sort of do what they want and ignore the facts.
So how could we introduce an effective opposition then, or a more effective opposition, do you think?
In the short term, the best way that I think the public can do that is by voting for more Reform Jersey candidates into the states of Jersey. We stand very clearly on a joint platform, and our voting in the states is 100% in line with what we told the public we would do before the election, and that's what makes us quite different from some of the politicians who were there already. I think that's the first way of doing it, but more than that, I think members of the community outside the state should be organising their own groups, I think, so campaign groups based on issues as and when they come up, and they shouldn't be afraid to engage with politicians or political parties when they think the government's got it wrong. And one of the best examples of that, as I mentioned before, was the recent protests about the esplanade, which I don't think many members of the public believe was a good idea, and we're soon going to find out, I believe, that the government has made a serious mistake.
And what will you be saying then when that information is to hand, when it is next discussed in the States then?
I'm going to have to avoid the temptation of saying I told you so, but I think most evidence that we've seen so far is that the estimates of how good this would be for Jersey's economy and how much money it would make for the states of Jersey have been overestimated, and too much money has been invested in the process of going along this way to the point where it's too embarrassing for the Council of Ministers to pull out, and I think we're going to end up losing money over it, and it looks like that sooner or later that's what we're going to find out, and it will be a very embarrassing day for the government when that happens.
But don't you see it as an investment for Jersey's future to keep bringing cash into, much needed cash into Jersey?
Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not against building offices. I think we should have decent offices, and the types of offices that get built in Jersey should be the ones that we know businesses here and businesses that want to relocate to Jersey want and need. I've got this old-fashioned view though that I don't think the government are the best people to be building them. We've seen, we've got this bizarre situation where we've got a Jersey-owned development company which builds offices and high-quality flats. That's the sort of thing you expect in Soviet Russia, not in Jersey. It doesn't make sense. And when other private firms are developing offices, they find it much easier to get tenants. So the risk is clearly more on us than it is on them. I think if it's going to happen, we should oversee the private sector doing it, not the State's Jersey Development Company.
In trying to gauge opposition to it's difficult to get, I think, beyond the hype. I mean, there were various figures quoted as to the number of people who turned up to protests with their arms ringed together on that Sunday morning. I heard various quotes. I think the one that kept coming through was about 1,000 people objecting to the financial centre going in there. That means that 99,000 others are okay with it, haven't got a problem.
Well, I think it was closer to 2,000. I was there,
All right,
and
so
I ran around the whole thing.
98,000 don't mind it.
Well, how do you know what they think because they weren't there? Many of them may have been busy. Lots of people in Jersey sort of don't see the point in protesting because they think their voices are ignored anyway. We've had social
Why aren't they members of your party then?
Sorry?
Why aren't they joining your party?
Oh, lots of them are actually, and that's the thing I'm constantly getting told by new members is that, we're actually delighted that there's a group out there which is saying what it means and meaning what it says, which is, very refreshing for Jersey politics. We don't often get that. But we've had social survey after social survey done in Jersey, which has shown that the public are disillusioned with politics. I think the last survey showed it was 75% of the population. Now, that is absolutely damning on our democratic system. It means the governments we get don't have proper legitimacy. And at the last election, it was actually the lowest turnout since before I was born. There has not been an election in my entire lifetime that has had a lower turnout than that. Anywhere else in Europe, that would be crisis point for democracy in various countries. And it's not just because we're a small island, because there are other small places which have much higher turnouts. Gibraltar, for example, they've got 30,000 people and they had 85% turnout at their last election. And at that election, they kicked out a government and replaced it with a new one. I think we should be able to do that here.
Do you think it should be mandatory to vote then?
My personal view, I don't think it's too much to ask people that they should vote, and if they want on the ballot box, there could be an abstain box if they don't want to register a vote. That's what they do in Australia. I personally don't think it's too much to ask people. We ask people to pay their taxes. We ask people to get insurance on their cars. So I don't think it's too unreasonable. I will stress, though, it's not Reform Jersey Party policy, and I would be absolutely astounded if it happened any time soon, and I'm not going to propose it because I would be wasting my time.
No, but should it be a legal requirement to vote? That's what I'm asking.
In my view, yes, but it's not going to be, and I'm not going to propose it. I want to focus on more important things, I think.
All right, well, one of the things that I know you've got strong views on is 0 hours contracts. A little bit earlier on Good Morning Jersey, we heard from the chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, Deputy Richard Renoff, of course. It's because 0 hours contracts, which don't actually give employees guaranteed working hours, are being reviewed here in Jersey. The Health and Security Scrutiny Panel wants to find out if employers abuse them and if the terms of the contracts can be improved. The panel wants employers and employees to fill out the survey, and Deputy Richard Renoff says that they want to know what people affected really think. I'll just play a little clip here.
We're trying to delve into the detail to find out what restrictions may be placed in the contracts, how people find. What's the principal difficulty? Is it lack of holidays, lack of pension rights, or is it just the uncertainty of a regular income?
Well, that's what he says. Where do you stand on this? Because I know particularly you do fight the corner for youngsters, and a lot of youngsters in the island are on these 0 hours contracts.
Yeah, well, in the last year, 50% of every job that's been created has been a 0 hour contract.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because our economy's not in a very good position, and when the government is taking measures to try and improve economic growth, I think they're doing things lopsided, and they seem to be willing to settle for second-rate jobs, whereas actually we need to be promoting jobs which are decent for people, where people know they've got regular hours, where they know how they can manage their lives based on what income they're going to get, and that they know that they can afford to live at the end of it rather than having to go on benefits, which is, definitely not going to help the situation we've got at the moment with a £145 million black hole that's looming.
So where are these figures coming from that you're quoting then?
We've had a study that was done by the Social Security Department recently into 0 hours contracts that came up with some of these figures, and I will say the reason they did that study was because Reform Jersey lodged a proposition asking them to do it, which we won. So that's another area that Reform Jersey is beginning to make a difference.
But that social survey suggests to us then that the 0 hours contracts are in fact well received then by a majority of workers. They say they're satisfied.
Yeah, and there's lots of people who I know I'm sure are very, very happy with that, and that's fine, which is why I don't think you should ban 0 hours contracts, because they clearly do have a place, and there are clearly situations where people are happy with them. But whatever the size of that minority is, nobody should be in a 0 hours contract if it's not good for them. And I meet people very regularly, especially when I'm going around knocking on doors. I see people whose lives are actually made thoroughly miserable by it because they don't know how much money they're going to have the next week. They don't know whether they can, afford their kid's birthday present, little things like that in life. So something's got to be done to create stable jobs, because this sort of thing didn't exist years ago, where families used to be able to get by with one breadwinner. The economy's changed, and for people at the bottom end of things are getting worse.
OK, let's try and delve into that then. So why do you think people are accepting 0 hours contracts in the first place?
Well, desperation for many of them it'll be, because we've got about 1,400 people unemployed in Jersey. So, basic rules of supply and demand is that, when there is more demand than there is supply, you can alter the price according to that. So if people are fighting over jobs, the person offering that job can offer worse terms because people are more likely to just take it. Otherwise, there's no other option for them. So if it's a case of no job or a 0 hours contract, of course you're going to take the 0 hours contract. But I want everybody to have the offer of a decent job with decent pay and decent hours.
OK, Lisa's on the phone. Deputy, if you put your headphones on, we'll get that. I think, Lisa, you are or have been on a 0 hours contract?
No, well, I was working for the States on a 0 hours contract.
Why was that then? Why are the States offering 0 hours contracts?
Well, it's like bank work.
I'd say, so you're on the bank, you're on call as and when they need you.
That's right,
OK,
yeah.
tell us your story then.
Well, what happened to me was I was perfectly happy working on the 0 hours contract for the department I work for. And they were happy with me. But I still had to go down to the work zone and sign on because I'm classed as underemployed.
Underemployed? Yeah.
Underemployed,
right.
Because it's not like a full-time job. It's not 35 hours a week or more. So I still had to go down there every so often and sign on, show them what jobs I'd been applying for, full-time jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Then out of the blue one day, I was actually at work for the state, and the work zone, one of the work zone people who was managing my case rang me and said, I've got an interview for you for a full-time position, and I've arranged the interview for you. So I asked my manager if I could have the time off, because that week I was rotated to work all week. So I had to get time off from where I was rotated to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the interview. And the work zone advisor told me that if I was offered the full-time position that she'd arranged the interview for, I had to take it.
You had to take it, yeah?
I had to take it.
Did you give a reason?
There was no, well, they said because otherwise I could lose any income support.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but doesn't that put you in a better position financially, Lisa, in accepting a full-time job?
Actually, it was worse, because what happened was I had to leave almost straight away because they wanted me to start full-time. They sent me over to England, the new company sent me over to England to train on their system.
So you accepted the job, did you? Yeah.
Well, I had to, because of what was told to me.
Mm-hmm.
And but of course, my manager didn't want me to leave because they'd spent 6 months training me to do that job.
But they'd only offered you a 0 hours contract. If they wanted you that much, surely they'd have given you a full-time job.
Well, no, there was no full-time jobs available at that time.
Okay, but yet they invested in you. That's an interesting thing.
But the point was they invested in me and they didn't want me to leave.
Okay, so where does this story go then?
Well, I gave up my job, which I loved doing, for the department I was working for, went to the other company, went and was trained in London for 4 days on their system, came back to Jersey, started work for the other company, and then 6 months down the line, the work dried up, and then I was out of a job again.
Completely out of a job, yeah?
Completely out of a job again. And, of course, by that time, my old boss had found somebody to replace me, so it's made me far worse off. That's an interesting... Yeah, let's try and unpick that a little bit. First of all, I'm going to ask Deputy Sam Mézec for his reaction to that story.
Yeah, it's a sort of story that we do hear every now and then. And, I mean... It's difficult because there is a balance that has to be struck between finding people who are lazy, who don't want to work, and who are playing the system, and making sure that when they're offered a job, they do take it. But then there are other people who are completely willing to work, who are very hardworking. They perhaps may have just been unlucky in their life and have entered a job that they've lost through no fault of their own, who end up getting forced into jobs that aren't suited to the set of skills they've got, which aren't stable jobs in the long term, because you as you said, you ended up losing it after 6 months, again through no fault of your own. So and in that situation, the taxpayer actually ends up worse off because we have to pay extra income support to those people in the long run. And the thing I'm particularly concerned about is if you're forcing people into jobs which are not good for them, not suited to their skill set, you can actually affect their mental health by that. You know, getting up every morning to go do a job that keeps you miserable, that's not suited to what you're doing and that you believe you've got no future in, it's not good for you. It won't make you happy.
What I don't understand is why you were forced to take that job, Lisa. I don't know.
No, well, I was told by the work zone advisor when she rang up to tell me of the arrangement for the interview. She said, and if they offer you the position, you've got to take it.
Well, Deputy Sam Mézec, you're in the States here. Is that just simply to get people like Lisa off the books?
Yeah, I think it probably is, to be honest.
Yeah.
We've got a situation at the moment where the Social Security Minister has announced she's going to cut income support completely for anybody below the age of 25. My view is that's simply a way of fixing the figures so it makes it look like unemployment's gone down, and it's not actually a reflection of the state our economy's in. You know, that's what I believe that is.
OK, so where do you find yourself now, Lisa? Still without a
Well,
job?
what happened? I volunteer for two places now. I've been a volunteer for victim support since 2009, and I'm a volunteer ambulance driver.
Oh, lovely.
So I pick up patients from their homes, take them to the hospital, to the clubs, you know, like the Poplars, lunch clubs, and those sort of places.
Well done. I'll take my hat off to you. Where do you find yourself now, though, in terms of a full-time job and in terms of being able to claim benefits?
I mean, I apply, as my current work zone advisor will tell you, I apply all the time. But I'm right at the end of my working life. I'm 65 next year, and of course, for anybody to invest in somebody of my age to train me up, I've got less than 6 months to do before my retirement.
But let me ask you this then, in front of the thousands of people that are listening to this programme right now, if you could get yourself, if I could wave my magic wand now and get you a job, what would you be looking for?
Oh, receptionist, back office, administration, and that's what I do. You know, that's what I've been doing for years.
Okay, well, someone might be listening to this show right now that could be in a... You just don't know, Lisa. That's why I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah. But the other thing I will say, the worst thing the state's brought in was the minimum wage.
Okay.
Because that has forced, everybody's took advantage of that minimum wage and reduced down. I mean,
so what do you mean? Do you mean we're in a worse place then in terms of being able to earn a decent wage? Companies are forcing down the level of pay just to comply with the law. Well, because the law is there, isn't it, saying what the minimum wage should be?
That's it. More and more firms are going on to the minimum wage, where when a job becomes vacant, they're starting at £6.78 an hour or whatever. Whereas, as you know, you need a minimum of £10 an hour to live on Jersey, and you need a minimum of £400 a week to live independently.
OK, I'll tell you what, Lisa, we've got a break for the news. I'll ask Deputy Sam Mézec about this when we come back in just a couple of ticks.
Tony Gillam.
On BBC Radio Jersey.
And it's Friday's Hot Seat today with Deputy Sam Mézec, who is also chairman of the Reform Jersey Party. He's with me until 1 o'clock. And we were just hearing from Lisa. Oh, before I go off on that, let me remind you of the phone number, 720-255, if you want to take part in our discussion today, 720-255, or emailing radiojersey@bbc.co.uk. So we heard from Lisa just before the news there about the situation she finds herself in. What can we do to improve her lot and people like her?
Yeah, well, she's in obviously a very difficult position, as she mentioned, where she's not far off of retirement, and that's something I do. As I keep saying, I hear it all the time, that sort of thing, and not just people like that, but young people who've been working for several years end up being made redundant because work simply dries up, and then end up in a sort of limbo position for a few years. She was talking at the end about the minimum wage and talking about negative impacts that have had. I slightly disagree in the sense that I think the overall impact of the minimum wage has definitely been a positive thing, and it's banned employers from being able to employ people on really exploitative wages.
But nevertheless, it does seem there's a bit of exploitation going on.
Well, exactly, and that's why I think the campaign for a living wage is so important, and I think the government could and should be doing much more to promote that. Businesses often come to the forefront when there's a rise in the minimum wage and say, well, actually, we're going to really struggle with this. We're in a really difficult position. That's why I think government should be getting around the table with businesses that find it hard to employ people, sitting down with them and say, well, listen, we don't really want you to be paying really low wages to these people. We're going to help you raise wages, and we're going to do that by finding what obstacles you're facing to employing more people. We're going to find out what difficulties your industries are facing, and we're going to work with you. We're going to change the law when it needs to be changed. We're going to offer support, perhaps even subsidy when it's necessary. And at the moment, I don't really think the government does that because the government is really, really obsessed with the finance industry. And that's important because the finance industry is our biggest employer, biggest taxpayer. We've absolutely got to do what we can to support it. But what about tourism? What about agriculture? What about retail? You know, we've got all this other stuff that employs lots of people as well. And more's got to be done to look out for those people and get more people into those jobs when they're not suitable for finance.
Deputy Sam Mézec is in the hot seat till 1 o'clock today. I want to move on because there's a lot I want to ask you about whilst you're here, Deputy. Let's look at this medium-term financial plan now, shall we? Because tightening up the belt and being prudent with the public purse, that's what the states are hoping to achieve over the next few years with the medium-term financial plan, and trying to get our financial shape into a positive situation over the next few years. It's looking at how the states are going to spend and, of course, save money over the next, 4 years, I think it is. As forecasters claim, there'll be a multi-million-pound deficit between the government's income and how much it spends. Jersey Social Security Minister Susie Pennell says it'll create a fairer and more targeted system. I'm guessing you don't agree with that.
No, I think that's a complete load of rubbish, and her department is the one that's doing the opposite of that at every given opportunity it possibly gets. At the moment, we're facing what we believe is a £145 million deficit. If you believed the ministers and the chief minister, this deficit came out of nowhere. Of course, that's rubbish. You don't lose £145 million out of nowhere. The reason we have this deficit is because for the past several years, we've been led by pretty incompetent governments who've been ignoring advice from scrutiny when it's been given to them about tax income forecasts, and they've been electioneering by mixing and matching taxes like lowering marginal relief, which happened in an election year when we're losing tax revenue. You know, it doesn't take a genius to work out what that's about.
Where do you think this £125 million has come from?
It's come about from mostly three places. Firstly is depreciation, states' assets going down in value. Part of it is the fact that we've not engaged in the proper capital projects that we should have been doing over the past few years, like a new hospital, for example. So when you leave it later, it becomes more expensive to do. So investment in education and health is something we absolutely need to do and can't afford not to do, but it costs money. And the third, and I think the most interesting point, is that up until now, the government has been operating on the basis that it would receive a particular amount of income from taxation, and it turned out to be wrong. It turned out to be too optimistic, and the amount of tax intake we've been getting has not been going up at the rate that they were basing it on. That's incompetence, because they were told by scrutiny that that's what they were doing and they ignored it.
Now, as we know, scrutiny are looking at this right now, and we've heard reports over the last couple of weeks, month or so, that they haven't got enough information to make a decision on whether they think this is a good idea. If your system of political parties was in, would you be able to find out? Would you be able to oppose this in a true political way?
One of the frustrations that I face is I'm an opposition member of the States of Jersey. I'm not part of the government. I don't support the government. I'm providing a voice to people who have an alternative point of view. That is the most frustrating thing about politics. I want to be in government. I want a majority Reform Jersey government that's changing our island and making ordinary people's lives better. When you don't occupy certain positions, the access to figures you have is limited. That being said, we've got this wonderful new law called Freedom of Information, which means if there's a particular piece of information you want to get, provided that it's legal, you can get it. And we're finding out some really interesting things at the moment about people's incomes and about our tax system that are helping us shape, I believe, more progressive policies which would help address this financial black hole we're facing.
All right, let's just talk a little bit more about the medium-term financial plan then. You've gone on record as saying that it's an attack on the old and young. Tell me why.
Well, Jersey is one of the richest places in the world. Between 2002 and 2012, the number of people earning above £1 million a year quadrupled, and that's despite having one of the worst financial crises that the world has ever seen. Jersey is not broke. We do have lots of money. The problem is the government's not managing it properly, and because it is a government, in my view, that doesn't represent ordinary people. It represents the wealthiest and the most powerful in Jersey. It's adopting policies in favour of those people rather than ordinary people. We're seeing pensioners' Christmas bonus being cut. I mean, can you think of anything more heartless than taking money away from pensioners who've worked hard all of their lives, when an alternative could be, actually, we might want to ask people who are doing the best in Jersey to contribute a bit more so we don't have to take away from people who are at the bottom. I think that's the progressive way of doing things. I think it's the right way of doing things. And from my perspective, for the next 3 years, that's the case I'll be making.
OK, then, so have your pleas fallen on deaf ears, I suppose, is the obvious question now. And what difference can you make?
Within the government, they are falling on deaf ears. And the reason is because Chief Minister has a very large parliamentary majority of his, what I call the Jersey Conservative Party. They're not an official party, but they operate as a party in virtually every other way. So they can win votes. And that's what happens when 70% of the electorate decided not to vote last time round. If they'd have come out and voted for different people, we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation. I think that Reform Jersey very regularly wins the argument but loses the vote. Our policies, particularly on things like raising the social security cap, which would raise £26 million overnight to help plug this financial black hole, virtually everybody I speak to is in favour of that. Our policy of a new 25p tax rate on earnings above £100,000, even high earners I meet support that. It's very, very few people that oppose it. And I think the tide is turning on things like this. And hopefully the more pressure the public puts on the government, the more they'll begin to listen. But ultimately they need to vote. So next time round, vote for Reform Jersey. That's the best piece of advice I can give you.
OK, well, let's not get into political campaigning on the air. But, I mean, it's all very well saying this, isn't it? That and you say that higher earners say that, yes, they don't mind paying a little bit more. You need to have a little bit of flesh on the meat, though, don't you? You need to come up with some figures. Have you got figures?
Fantastic. I'm glad you've asked me that question because I printed them off before I came out. Yeah, if you introduced a 5%, an extra 5% to the top rate of tax on earnings above £100,000, that would raise, based on the 2012 figures, just below £24 million. It would, give or take a few million here or there because that was 3 years ago. Those are the most up-to-date figures we can get. Raising the cap on social security contributions for high earners. Most islanders don't realise that if you're incredibly wealthy, earning above £150,000 a year, you pay a lower rate of social security than the rest of us do. And you pay a much lower rate of social security than self-employed people do, and that's a whole other scandal altogether. We're able to get these figures because we've got 3 members of the States of Jersey who are asking more questions than all other states members put together in the states to get these figures out. We're lodging freedom of information requests, and what we're hoping to do in the next year is actually put together a comprehensive policy statement that says this is where the money comes from, this is what we're going to pay for, this is the services we're going to invest in. That is something you can only do under a political party system because you've got the people and the resources to do it. Any independent who stands for election can promise you the world and they'll deliver nothing because they just can't do it by themselves. You have to work as a team.
What's wrong with the government's proposal then, as I understand it, to charge more for our healthcare? I know we've seen increases in social security in the last year or two, charge for things like sewage. What's wrong with those ideas?
Well, for a start, they're introducing new taxes, and when you introduce a new tax, you have to create bureaucracy to manage it. So that's more civil servants who'll have to administer it. It's more forms that people are going to have to fill out. It's more bank accounts that are going to have to be set up. Actually, it makes much better economic sense not to create new taxes, but to adjust the taxes you've already got. That's the smarter way of doing it, in my point of view. Are we going to
could we see GST going up?
That's actually the very easiest one to go up, and that's what they did last time round. They increased it from 3% to 5%. The problem we have, though, is GST affects the poorest people in our society the most. So it's a balance. You have to strike the right balance between what is the fiscally prudent thing to do and what is morally the right thing to do. And our government, I believe, has no moral compass because it's going to be raising stealth taxes like the health tax, like the sewerage tax, taxes which they didn't have the respect for the public to tell them they were going to do that before the election. They lied, frankly. They brushed it under the carpet, and it's only now it's coming to the forefront. If instead we looked at a more progressive progressive income tax and social security contribution system, we wouldn't need these new taxes, and low and middle earners wouldn't have to pay more.
OK, then, so that's your view on it. You mentioned there, Sam, Deputy Mézec, that adjusting the taxes we already have is the easiest option, or the most effective short-term option, let's put it that way. So which taxes would you go for?
I've already said that I believe that if you're earning above £100,000 in
So
Jersey, income tax, I'll stress that affects 4.5% of islanders.
Mm-hmm.
So the vast majority of people would not pay any more if I were Chief Minister. I'd be saying just people earning above £100,000, an extra 5%. It's not much. Most of them are happy to pay it, and it means we don't have to do things like cut the pensioners' Christmas bonus or kick young people off of income support. Social security contributions as well. You and I pay 6%. Most people pay 6%. Self-employed people pay 12.5%. If you're earning very, very high amounts, you actually pay a lower percentage. I think we should all pay the same percentage, and that would raise revenue, and it would be fairer, and it would help people on lower middle incomes.
What about things like corporation tax? Did I mention that?
Yeah, now that's a tricky one, isn't it? 0, 10 and 20% if you're a utility company, which doesn't tend to get mentioned very often. That, I think, is the root of where this black hole has come from, because 10 years ago we decided we were going to introduce 0, 10, and there are elements of 0, 10 which are very important, which we absolutely must not use. But at every single election since then, government ministers have stood up for re-election and they've said, we're going to find a way of making foreign companies in Jersey pay tax, and every election comes again and they still haven't done it. They've got to do something to get around that. There's a couple of proposals at the moment within the property tax consultation that might be worth considering, but we've got to do it in a way that isn't going to damage the finance industry by scaring firms away who do need that zero rate to exist.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Because we've had the Chief Minister on this show many times before, and he has said that is probably the most attractive thing to a lot of these international companies, that we don't have any tax situation for them.
Yeah, there are certain transactions which have to be zero rated simply because they won't be viable otherwise. And it's important that we keep hold of that and we don't adjust that. But I don't think it's fair to say that foreign companies who are operating on the high street, who aren't here for that zero rate, they're here for other reasons because there's a market and they'll make money. It's fair to say that they should be paying tax. And if the government had addressed this problem earlier, the fiscal situation we're in at the moment wouldn't be as bad as it is.
Deputy Sam Mézec is with me until 1 o'clock today, and you've only got, 10 minutes to go. If you want a question answering or get an opinion from Deputy Sam Mézec, it's never very short of those, it has to be said. Get on the phone on 720-255, 720-255. I want to move to another issue now, if I may, one that's in the news today, and we've been hearing about the situation in the parish of St Saviour. It's been £5,000 already for failing to attract enough honorary police officers, and a similar fine could be imposed today when their constable, Sadie Laswell Renard, appears before the Royal Court. It's because St Saviour is legally, of course, required to have 6 centeniers, 6 vingteniers and 18 constable officers, of course. And in recent week, the parish has managed to recruit 2 people to less senior roles, and 2 constable officers and a centenier will be sworn into office today, and a vingtenier will be reinstated. So if by early September the parish still hasn't filled its vacant post, which is legally obliged to do so, another fine might follow. I suppose my question to you, Deputy Sam Mézec, is do you think the people of Jersey don't really feel any sense of civic duty?
I don't think that's true. I think Jersey as a community, people are very proud of what we've got here. We all love our island, regardless of what our political views may be. And I do think people ideally would like to volunteer, and whether it's for the parishes or whether it's for a charity, people would like to do it. And we've been having a really interesting debate in the island recently about the implications of this, St Saviour not being able to get the centeniers they need, because the population of Jersey is the highest it's ever been. So theoretically, you've got a much greater pool of people to ask to volunteer, but they still can't find someone to do it. And there have been suggestions about, changing the criteria of who's allowed to stand, or this or that. I think there's an elephant in the room that's being missed here, and that is that low and middle income people are actually finding life much more difficult now than they were years and years ago. People are having their finances stretched, they're stressed at work, they're struggling to provide for their kids. And when you're in that situation, well, it's no wonder people don't have as much time to volunteer as they'd like. I think if we had an economy that was working better for people, was providing them with more disposable income, providing them with more time to spend doing on the things that they want to do, I think you'd get people coming out wanting to volunteer more often. So I do think there's a direct connection, I believe, between people who are able to serve in the honorary system and our economic situation. And I think they're interlinked, and we need to bear that in mind rather than trying to, put a plaster on an open wound, which I think some suggestions have been.
But, I mean, that doesn't get us another centennial, does it? Do you think the law itself is fair? Because it's a fairly old one, and Sadie Swear was on Good Morning Jersey this morning explaining what she thought was the reason behind it. And I think Ashley asked her the question directly, is it fair that the residents of St Saviour's should get fined if the centenary isn't in place? She said yes, because it's down to them, the 8,000 or so residents of St Saviour, to come up with somebody, so therefore they should be fined.
Yes, well, she has a point. The law is the law is the law, and the law says that if you don't fill these vacancies, you will be fined. So if the court fines St Saviour, it's not doing anything wrong, and it is operating by the book. So I suppose it's fair in that sense. The wider question is the law fair in the first place? And I know I'm not often someone who sits on the fence, but I'm not actually sure whether I agree with the law or not. I may think it's the right thing. I may think more and decide it's the wrong thing. I'm not sure. What I'm more concerned about is actually reaching these people, letting them know the importance of our honorary system and how it's actually financially a good thing to have people volunteering, because it means we don't have to pay people to do it professionally. So it's an important part of Jersey life, and I really, really hope for Sadie's sake, because I adore Sadie. I think she's a lovely, lovely person. I really hope she gets these centenarians in, because it would be good for her parish, and she's been through a lot, and it's not fair.
Yeah, it would be useful, wouldn't it, to find out who is eligible to become a centenary? Because to be honest, I'm not sure whether I've just moved to St Saviour. Could I volunteer, I wonder?
One of the requirements is an age criteria, so I won't ask you about that.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah, sure. I don't know, and I think part of the problem is that the information isn't as easily accessible as you'd like.
Maybe that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've recently been helping somebody who's standing for Procureur de Bien Public in St Helier, and he really struggled to find the information he needed about how he stood for election, when the nomination forms had to be in. He really struggled, and in the age of the internet, theoretically, this information should be really easily accessible. So I think the Comité de Connétable, need to get together and say, right, let's come up with some package of information about what it is we do, put it online, and make sure it's easily understandable and that people know where to find it and can read it.
OK, what about this? We had a call this morning. It was Andrew, who is from St Saviour. He called us to suggest the following. He says he feels that helping out should be part of the job of a backbencher in the state. So you're a backbencher. If their parish is really in trouble and struggling, at least can't they help out to tide the parish over? Is that a good idea?
I think it's a bad thing for people to hold more than one office. I don't think it would be right for a states member to become an honorary police officer at the same time. I don't think it's right for you to be making law and enforcing law at the same time. And we recently had the constable's powers curtailed in that sense as well. So I don't think it's right in that sense. Should the deputies be encouraging people who they know are able to contribute to do so? Yes, I think we should be, which is why in my position in the political party, in St Helier we don't have struggle getting people to come forward for these roles, because we've got so many people in the parish and outside the parish who are eligible to do it. But I would encourage people who care about their community to get involved in whatever capacity it is, whether it's their local roads committee, whether it's standing for election to the states itself. That's a good thing, and we should be doing what we can to encourage those people.
OK, we're running right out of time, only 3 minutes to go, but we've got David on the phone now. David, if I could ask you to be brief as possible with your question.
Hi, yeah, I just turned on the radio and I heard them mentioning about the social security contributions, and I got the impression that they were saying that people on the Class 2 social security contributions were paying less. Is that the point?
No, that's not what I was saying. Class 2 contributions obviously pay significantly more than Class 1. I was talking about people who are earning above £150,000, because there's an upper limit above which you don't pay a penny, so your overall rate goes down. But that's irrespective of whether you're Class 1 or 2.
And Sam, do you support then the people who are basically starting businesses and trying to generate value? And are you aware that I think they get quite a hard time, really? Yeah, I completely. Employment laws, ITIS returns, social security returns, GST, keeping statutory files, having to keep bookkeeping, data protection, health and safety. The list goes on. I think it's quite an administration burden for these small businesses, really.
Yeah, and I know I'm being pressured to give a short answer, unfortunately, because of the clock. What I will say is my policy is to introduce more progressive rates of social security contributions for the self-employed. Class 2 contributions is not flexible enough, and lots of people on low incomes but who are self-employed are paying far too much. It stifles economic growth, it stops them from employing people, and if I were in charge, that's one of the things that would be my priority to change.
Okay, and the other thing I'd like to point out is I think when people are in legal matters, they get legal aid. Mm-hmm. I think we need to start thinking all these people that are getting all of this administration burden, maybe they should get some sort of accountancy support, because it is a massive burden for them. And I find, they end up getting into the stage where they're getting taken to court for, not paying their social security contributions and stuff. And it's just blowing out small businesses.
Yeah, and that's why I think we should give more support to JACs so that they can give free support to businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises which are struggling with these things. So I'd be giving them more funding and more expertise to do that.
OK, Debbie, we've got to leave it there because we're almost out of time. Deputy Sam Mézec, thank you for coming in. You did just drop in a little phrase earlier on, which I've clocked on, if I were Chief Minister. Now, could that happen? If you became Chief Minister at some point in the future, and you're still very young, so the possibility is that you could become Chief Minister, Mézec, in the fullness of time, how would you be different to any Chief Minister that's gone before you?
I'd be the first Chief Minister we've ever had who would be completely honest about what their policies are. I would aim to be inclusive, genuinely inclusive, because the ones we've had so far have been a complete letdown in every regard of that. But I would not be a Chief Minister of myself. I would be a Chief Minister of the people. I would have an outside group of the states, of ordinary people who were able to filter up policies towards me, things that mattered to them, so that I could implement them and be their Chief Minister, unlike our current Chief Minister, who's a Chief Minister of the rich and powerful. I'd want to be one for the people.
Deputy Sam Mézec, thank you for occupying the hot seat for today.